Loibner-Waitkus.
Alright, I'm Alan Loibner-Waitkus, and this is American Lit 1865 to present, and I swear one of these days I'm going to film this video in decent lighting inside, but tonight is not the night because barn burning is going to be pretty difficult, and this is literally about the 50th time I've started this video. And hopefully we'll get through it this time. I keep there's so much going on here. I get ahead of myself and find myself, all over the place. And so I'm going to try to do my best to think linear here and do a video that makes a lot of sense. But, this is as close to a perfect short story as we get in this class. It's brilliantly written. In fact, if I had any complaint about Faulkner's barn burning, it's that he's showing off a little too much with his writing. So let's get down to it. When we start this story, I think it's really interesting that it starts a lot like The Storm with Bobineau and Beebe in the general store. This time you've got Abner and Sardi in the general store. The difference is Abner's on trial for burning down a barn, and Sardi is smelling food through cans. He's in jeans or pants that are too tight, that have been mended. The point here is he can't read the cans. Again, this is not a good father-son relationship. The father has clearly not raised a good child. Luckily, my childhood did not involve testifying on behalf of my father and going to his trials for burning down barns. So again, we start with a really interesting and kind of depressing look at his life. Now we move into this trial pretty quickly, and one of the things you'll notice from the dialogue and their specifically their dialect is you can tell that they're uneducated. Okay, the upper class or even middle class wouldn't have said "his'n" and words like that. So that's what Faulkner's intending to do there with the quoted matter that's difficult for a lot of people to read. We have Sardi, who is basically what's happened here is Harris, and let's think about this for a second. The man who's suing or who's brought this case against Abner is, it's over this hog. Well, it's over a barn burning, but it started over a hog. And, the first time the hog got loose and into his, field or, crops or whatever, he sent the pig back the first time. The second time, not only does he bring the pig back, he brings the stuff to mend the fence so the pig can't escape again. So he does everything really he can short of building a fence for Abner. And then the third time seems reasonable. He wants $1 for keeping this pig until he can pick it up. And that night he has Abner, and this is a really weird kind of thing that I kind of try to stretch my head around, what the association is between this African-American man. And, of course, Faulkner uses the N-word in description, again, through dialogue, as I explained in the introduction with Faulkner, to say, hay and fire can burn, which clearly was a threat from Abner about the barn, and coincidentally, the barn burns. Now, the problem with this is, much like Casey Anthony, whom we all knew was guilty, there's just not enough evidence there to prove it. And so the justice of the peace, and remember, we're in a general store here. We're not in a courtroom, and that's going to be important later. And the justice of the peace is the one who is acting as judge, sort of says, leave this country, meaning this area, right? And Abner, we know, is already in his moving clothes, not his court clothes, and Sardi notes that. So that's important there too, that we see that this is a pattern, and we'll see that in a second. Now, one of the other things, again, the judge calls forward Sardi to testify, and when he finds out he's named after Colonel Sartoris, which is the Colonel Sartoris, the mayor in A Rose for Emily, who's a consistent character in Faulkner's works, he, makes the comment that he could not possibly lie. Now we know in order for Sardi to back his father, he has to lie, and he's willing to do that. We can tell that, even though this is third person, we can tell from the it's omniscient in a way, so we can tell from what we know with Sardi that he's willing to do that. He sees the justice of the peace and Mr. Harris as his enemy, right? Because it's his father's enemy. So we see this close tie between the two. But Mr. Harris objects to that. He mainly because he doesn't think that this child should. It's not as much, he's just going to lie for his father. It's more about he's going to expose this child to this, which is a ridiculous thing for a father to do. Now, there's this thought process, and I'm going to quote Faulkner here, and Faulkner loves to be wordy, but there's this thought process here with Sardi where he says, again through third person though, but he could hear. Enduring those subsequent long seconds, while there was absolutely no sound in the crowd, little room save that of quiet and intent breathing, it was as if he had swung outward at the end of a grapevine, over a ravine, at the top of the swing, had been caught in a prolonged instant of mesmerizing gravity, weightless in time. Now this is very much Faulkner, a long, complicated, brilliantly written sentence. But if you think about this, it's similar to a lot of us grew up in Arkansas around. We say creeks here, not crick, but it makes it sound more southern, where we throw a rope over a tree that's close to a creek or a lake. I grew up pretty much on Lake Washita, and this was something common that we would do when you swing out, right? So you swing out, and there's that point where sort of time freezes, and you have to, are you going to let go, or are you going to swing back in? What's going to happen there? And time sort of freezes. It's very similar to that, you have that kind of moment that if you've ever been in a car wreck where sort of time stops. And it's that way, but that's what he's sort of alluding to here. But the interesting thing is he's going to swing back in. And so we can see this is a little bit of a foreshadowing that Sardi may be coming back in another direction, right? And we'll see that eventually, in the story here. Now, after they leave, of course, the mother, and this is interesting. Notice that that Sardi looks like Abner. They're both very, very thin. The brother and the two siblings, the two sisters, whom are described by Faulkner as bovine, again meaning that they're fat, and the brother who's overweight. We have to assume they've gotten this from the mother, right? And because Abner is not fat, and so there's sort of a idea that sort of heavier people are dullards, and Kurt Vonnegut made the comment that nothing was more upsetting than someone who was overweight who was not. Nothing disgusted people more than an overweight person, because they were stupid. That was the assumption there. Than someone who was overweight and smart. That really kind of upset people. But we can see, again, people in literature a lot of times, someone who's overweight at this time would have been seen as sort of, again, a dullard. And you can Google that term if you need to. And I'm not suggesting that that's fact, but that just was a common thing. And so, sort of a simpleton. And that kind of thing with the mother. And we notice when we get back to the carriage that's prepared to take them away, because they know that they're going to go away. In fact, Sardi knows that in his 10 years, they've moved 12 times. And when we get there, there's all of this sort of symbolism, and I'm not going to really get into too much of that with the items within the carriage, one of which, though, is this broken mother-of-pearl clock, which is, again, sort of a piece of crap. I mean, mother-of-pearl is, semi-nice, but what's interesting about that is it's her dowry, which means that's what her family had to give for him to marry her, which lets us know, she's not a quality wife in that sense. Now, on the way to the carriage, and this is important, and we'll keep recurring throughout the thing, Abner is sort of called a barn burner by another child, and Sardi is attacked, right? We've got this great sort of stream of consciousness where you, as a reader, we're really confused as to what's happening, and he's attacked by this other kid, which ultimately ends up with a bloody nose. Now, when they get back, of course, the mother's first instinct is to clean the blood off the child's face, and the father says, no, let him be, let that blood stay there. Now, this is going to be a common symbol throughout this story, and the reference to blood being relatives, right? My blood kin. We see those things, we hear those things all the time, and so this idea of leaving the blood on there is very important symbolically, but I mean it's almost to the point that it's moved beyond a symbol, and it's very clear and direct that Abner wants him to leave that on there because he wants that blood to be important, that it's very important based on his lifestyle and his life of crime and all of this other stuff, that blood ties keep the kid quiet and keep the kid on his side, because the kid could ultimately destroy him, which is what we see in the end. That evening, they camp, and in the woods. Now, it's important to note on the way out, we've established a couple of things. The timeline. We know here that this must be set in the late 1800s, because 30 years before, during the Civil War, Abner was a horse thief, okay, and was shot in the leg and still has a stumble because of that. We find out later Abner did not steal from the North or the South, he just stole. Now, if Faulkner was to give us either, we could as a reader find it respectable, okay? If Faulkner said he stole from the North, then we're thinking, okay, well, he was a Southerner, even though, please, for the love of God, tell me you were for the North in the Civil War. But let's say, as a Southerner, that would have been respectable that he's stealing from the North. Had he stolen from the South, then we could say, well, he was sided with the North, but he doesn't. He just indiscriminately steals, and he steals horses too. That's really important there, because think about this time period. Your horse is your livelihood, and there is no horse insurance and that kind of thing. So if you steal someone's horse, you're really taking away their livelihood. It's really just about, at the time, the worst thing you can possibly steal, which lets us know sort of what a horrible human being Abner is. Now, while they're camping, and this is important and something I'm a little obsessed with, this campfire becomes really, really important, and Faulkner is able to do things on so many levels. This campfire is, he describes it as niggardly, which means chintzy, small. There is no racial association here. I know Faulkner uses, the N-word earlier, but that's not any relationship to this. There's no race tied to that term. But Faulkner says that the fire was, niggardly, small, that kind of thing. We know, here are a couple of things. Again, I'm an Eagle Scout, and knots were not my thing. Trees and all the rest of the stuff was not my thing, but I was sort of the fire person, and I was very good at starting fires and that kind of stuff, and maintaining them. And with fires, it is much, much more difficult to maintain a small fire. Okay, it's easier just to throw a ton of wood on a fire, let it burn, and it just stays lit all night or for several days. And we know that he keeps the fire small because of habit, because when he was a thief living in the woods during the Civil War, he could not have a large fire because it would have, given him away as to where he was hiding as a thief. But it's also interesting here that it shows two more things, okay? It shows, number one, that he has complete control of fire. So there was no doubt, I don't think, from the very beginning that he was responsible for the barn fire. But here we see that he, just this absolute control that he has of this. And, the term ravening is used throughout this, right? Which just means overly consumptive, right? He just sort of consumes everything around him. But when it comes to fire, he doesn't. He has no problem stealing from other people. No problem being liberal with other people's things, and in fact he burns part of a fence post, right, for this fire, but he still keeps it very, very small. So again, it shows that control, number one, but number two, it also shows that he really doesn't have I mean, this fire represents like keeping his family warm, right? And he's not really concerned with that. He would have made a bigger fire to keep the family warm. And so again, we see again, terrible father, terrible provider, all of that kind of stuff. Now, while we're on that, let's go to the Despain kind of issue. Before we get into the Despain house, I want to discuss, why he's hired, and that's the thing with 12 jobs or 12 different moves, and we can assume here he's a sharecropper, right? 12 different moves in 10 years of Sardi's life, and Faulkner writes about Abner, there was something about his wolf-like independence and even courage. When the advantage was at least neutral, which impressed strangers, as if they got from his latent, ravening ferocity not so much a sense of dependability as a feeling that his ferocious conviction in the rightness of his own actions would be an advantage to all those whose interests lay with his. All right, now what's interesting here is actually Faulkner should have used lie, but number two instead of lay. But number two, where's that past tense? Anyway, well, we won't worry about it. The point is the wolf-like independence, first off, okay? Wolf-like independence. Think about that term for a second. Okay, are wolves independent animals? No, okay? We know that they travel in packs. If you watch True Blood, if you watch anything, wolves are pack animals. They go in groups. And so if he had wolf-like independence, that's not a good thing. That means he's been rejected by the pack, or he's rejected the pack, okay? So that's not a good thing, even though these people see it as that. And again, what are they impressed by? His ravening ferocity, not so much as a sense of dependability. So again, he's sort of ferocious, and they see this as a quality that maybe their interests lay with his, right? He's just so motivated that he will make a profit for them, but this is ultimately, what's going to backfire on them. But we see that as, an interesting thing there. Now, that is also the evening that he slaps Sardi for, even though Sardi was never able to speak, and we can guess from, the thing that he was going to lie and back his father, but he still slaps him. And he says that, I'm going to read that quote too. This is Abner here. You were fixing to tell him. You would have told him. He didn't answer. His father struck him with the flat of his hand on the side of his head, hard but without heat, exactly as he had struck the two mules at the store. Exactly he would strike either of them with any stick in order to kill a horsefly. His voice still without heat or anger. You're getting to be a man. You got to learn. You got to learn to stick to your own blood, or you ain't going to have any blood to stick to you. Do you think either of them, any man there this morning, wouldn't? Don't you know all they wanted was a chance to get at me because they knew I had 'em beat? Later, 20 years later, he was to tell himself, if I had said that they wanted only truth, justice, he would have hit me again. But now he said nothing. He was not crying. He just stood there. Answer me, his father said. So again, he hits him without heat. Now, what does that mean? That means there's no real warmth there, right? He treats him like he does the mules. He treats him like he does everything else. This is just sort of habit. He's doing this to keep him in line and keep him to continue to lie. And again, he directly mentions the term blood there. So that symbol is, almost not even a hidden symbol. It's just, pretty clear. Now, one of the biggest scenes and one of the most important things to understand in this is the entrance to the Despain house, okay? The importance of the view. Now, the Despain house is very similar to, the description of it is almost identical, and I'll bring up a photo of Roanoke, Faulkner's home. But what's interesting is when Sardi sees it, he says it looks like a courthouse. Now, that's a little bit of foreshadowing there, because we see two different trials, both of which happen in general stores, both of which don't happen in legitimate courthouses. So it's almost like we can say to ourselves, justice is going to be given here, right? It's going to be dealt out from this home. So we see that. The other thing, too, is Sardi sort of says to himself and thinks he can't penetrate this home. This is too much for him. He'll have to behave like a normal human being. Okay? So he can't, this is the one place that he can't penetrate, right? That he can't burn, that he can't do what he's done before. He'll have to change. And as they're walking up the drive to the home, of course, Abner could just, there's horse manure, and all Abner has to do is step slightly, to the left or the right. And what does he do? He steps square in the manure and then enters the home and puts it on the rug. Now, to Sardi, this is a huge moment because this home that had once seemed so impenetrable, right? Of everything that he's seen, he thought, this is the one place my father can't do what he always does. He enters there and soils it, right? He brings in manure and gets it on the rug. Okay, so that's very, very important there to sort of this moment, because this is what we call a Bildungsroman. Okay, it is a coming of age story, the maturity of him, and this is really that point when he realizes his father, can't be stopped, that his behavior is not going to change, that this is never going to get any better. It's not going to be any different. So they give him the rug, right, and to clean. That's what he's in charge of. And of course, they clean it and lie. And that would be the equivalent of, taking it home, putting it on the super strong setting on your washing machine, throwing a delicate silk rug in and tossing in some bleach. Okay, so it destroys the rug. Now, the agreement is, or the agreement, Mr. Despain comes forward and says, okay, here's what you're going to do. $100 worth of this rug, that's 20 bushels of corn. Let's do this. Let's make that the deal, which seems reasonable. But Abner's not happy with it, so they end up yet again in court. And this time, Abner gets what it's a pretty good compromise. It's half of what Mr. Despain wants, which is he gives him 10 bushels, the judge does, or the justice here. Again, we have no real judges. But again, much like the pig, it's just not enough. It's not what Abner wants. And so when they go back to the house, they go into this mode of, get the kerosene. Everyone in the family kind of knows their role. It's time for a barn burning. Okay, and so we go into this great little preparation mode, and off goes Abner to start this barn burning. And this is the point where Sardi snaps. Right, he's had enough. He's realized this is never going to end. His father's not going to learn any better, and he knows the consequences of what's going to happen, but nonetheless, he attempts to break free. Now, to go warn the Despain family. Now, what's interesting about this is, notice the mother is holding him. Okay, and so we've got this blood idea that's run throughout the story, and the only people there who aren't related by blood are the wife and the aunt. Right, the aunt is the sister of the mother, and Sardi is trying to break free to go warn the Despains, and ultimately, who unleashes him? The mother, okay? And ultimately, who says, if you don't, I'll go do it myself? The aunt. So again, they break free. He breaks free, and he runs, and he warns the Despains of what's happening. Barn fire kind of thing. Now, we know from that the father's going to be killed, okay? And Sardi runs, after he warns that, he sort of runs to escape what's kind of going to happen, okay? And we've got this quote. Again, this is interesting, because this is one sentence, okay? This is Faulkner, okay, one sentence. He could not hear either. The galloping mare was almost upon him before he heard her, and even then he held his course, as if the very urgency of his wild grief and need must in a moment more find him wings, waiting until the ultimate instant to hurl himself aside and into the weed-choked roadside ditch as the horse thundered past and on. For an instant, in furious silhouette against the stars, the tranquil early summer night sky which, even before the shape of the horse and rider vanished, stained abruptly and violently upward. A long, swirling roar, incredible and soundless, blotting the stars. And he springing up and into the road again, running again, knowing it was too late, yet still running, even after he heard the shot, and an instant later, 2 shots. Pausing now, without knowing he had ceased to run, crying, "Pap, Pap," running again before he knew he had begun to run, stumbling, tripping over something and scrambling up again and ceasing to run, looking backward over his shoulder at the glare as he got up, running on among the invisible trees, panting, sobbing, "Father, Father." Okay, now what's interesting about, again, that was one sentence. Okay, welcome to Faulkner. But that stream of consciousness, that whole process there, is just so typical Faulkner, and so brilliant there. And what we see then from that ending is he goes into the woods to escape. He can't return back to his family. He's the one who led to his father's death, and a 10-year-old on his own at this time is not a great thing. Now, we know earlier he mentioned that 20 years later he would look back on this, so that we know he survived. Now, one of the questions you have to ask yourself about the ending is it positive or negative? And I'm going to go with a little bit of both, but I think predominantly positive. Faulkner notes that as he's going back, and he's thinking, my father, that was my father, he was a hero, all of that other kind of stuff. We tend to do that when someone dies. I noticed that when I taught high school. Students aren't mature enough to kind of handle it, and we always had a student or two die, and the most unpopular, unlikable student would die, and all of a sudden they become the greatest, saint in the entire world. And that's what Sardi does here with his father, right? He becomes, this war hero and all of these sort of positive things. But what's interesting is, Faulkner writes that the grief and despair are still there, but the fear and terror are gone. Okay, so he's not going to give us this whole positive ending. But let's look. I'm going to read the and again, I'm pulling from my book here. It's not on my screen, but I'm going to read the last paragraph. The slow constellations wheeled on. It would be dawn, and then sunup after a while, and he would be hungry. But there would be tomorrow, and now he was only cold, and walking would cure that. His breathing was easier now, and he decided to get up and go on. And then he found that he had been asleep because he knew it was almost dawn, the night almost over. He could tell from the whippoorwills. They were everywhere now among the dark trees below him, constant and inflectioned and ceaseless, so that, as the instant for giving over to the day birds drew nearer and nearer, there was no interval at all between them. He got up. He was a little stiff, but walking would cure that too, as it would the cold, and soon there would be the sun. He went on down the hill, toward the dark woods within which the liquid silver voices of the birds called unceasing, the rapid and urgent beating of the urgent and queering heart of the late spring night. He did not look back. Okay, now I'm going to read that as positive. Okay, we know, again, he's a 10-year-old. How positive could it be? It, probably ends up in an orphanage or some sort of bad situation here in the South. You're not a 10-year-old on your own in the South and survive, even though at the time 10-year-olds would be expected to be much more mature than they are now. But I think it ends positive. Again, he's going downhill. Now, some people could read that as a negative thing, but, things are getting easier. And he's entering the woods, which could be a negative thing, but I kind of see that as the unknown. He's entering this unknown, but what we do see, again, is the sun rising, the birds begin to sing, and things look like, they're going to be more positive as we move through. And so, I see this, I've said this in every video just about, a good author's not going to tell us how it ends, right? They leave that up to us, but I see that as a positive ending in a way. Now, Let's look at some different things. Number one, what does the role of race play here? Not really as much as a Rose for Emily, I don't think, other than we really only have one African American character, and we start off with that, and that's we get that N word repeated numerous times early on. But again, at this point, that term would have been used not only by lower class whites, but upper class whites, and even African Americans to a certain extent. There's also that idea of blood, which I think is very, very important because that's dependent on the father's success as a criminal. Okay, and so this blood stuff we get through there is all tied into that. Fire is an interesting motif here, symbol here, because what does fire do? It sort of consumes everything. Okay, and that would be what Abner does, right? He just sort of consumes everything senselessly and destroys everything. Okay, peace does ultimately, and this is a big question, does ultimately Sardi find peace? Again, Faulkner's not going to give us that. He gives us that there's still grief and despair, but the terror and the fear are gone. Okay. This Despain house is hugely important. I cannot stress that enough. That's, again, he saw that justice, it looked like a courthouse, and that's from where justice came. It's also, because it seemed so impenetrable, the one place that his father couldn't destroy, it led to him, telling on his father, and ultimately leading to his father getting killed. The soiled rug, again, plays along with that, that's how his father sort of even went past what he normally would do and took it inside this home. And then finally we get this term ravening over and over again. We see that a lot through this story, and we know that means to sort of senselessly consume, and that's what Abner does. So, again, I think this is a great story. It's got a lot of original ideas. The writing is phenomenal. And, I hope you enjoyed it and got the idea of what's happening there. And anyway, if you have any questions, give me a call. Wish I had done better on this, but it's a tough story to go through, especially in 32 minutes. So if you have any questions, give me a call.